Bilateral and multilateral negotiations to agree the Biological Weapons Convention in 1971 resulted in a much weaker treaty instrument that had been envisaged by the British in 1968 and 1969. We asked Nicholas Sims to say a few words about the original British proposal and the ways in which specific parts of the original proposal were weakened.
There were really 4 bits which I particularly regret having been lost. One was an explicit ban on the use of BW, which it would have been very good to have had reaffirmed, because after all the Geneva Protocol ban only referred to bacteriological methods of warfare, and by 1969 people feared viruses just as much, and also toxins and fungi and rickettsiae needed to be covered. Also, they needed to make clear that this was a ban on use in all circumstances, not just in war, but for hostile purposes elsewhere and in armed conflict short of war. They also needed to cover those many states who had not joined the Geneva Protocol. There were many who had stayed outside it, even more in 1968 to 71 than there are now. So I think it's a very great pity that the explicit ban on use was dropped under great pressure from those who felt it would detract from the authority of the Geneva Protocol, but who never made a convincing argument as to how that could possibly happen. Secondly, there was authority for the Secretary-General of the United Nations directly to carry out investigations in the event of use. That provision dropped away when the ban on use was dropped from the Convention. Thirdly, there was explicit mention of infestation as well as infection as a route by which biological warfare might be waged. And if only that had remained in as a definition of use, then we wouldn't have had all the argument of the last few years about whether infestation of crops is or is not a breach of the Biological Weapons Convention. And fourthly, there was an attempt to ban research. Now, I know this is extremely difficult, partly because research and development are so closely intertwined, and partly because it's difficult to ascribe purpose to research. Nevertheless, the United Kingdom Draft Convention did have, among the prohibitions, conducting research for the purposes, for the prohibited purposes, research into the prohibited objects, in other words. So there was an attempt at least to constrain research so that, like development, production, stockpiling, acquisition, retention and transfer, it would also be an activity which was illegal unless there was a justification for it, and the justification would have been the same as for the others, namely protective, prophylactic or other peaceful purposes, and the types and the quantities, both types and quantities, have to meet that criterion.